So in the year 1962, there was this sudden explosion of creativity. It happened on one of the earliest computers, the PDP-1 at MIT, and a computer scientist named Steve Russell made this. It's the first computer game. It's called Space War. It's for 2 players. You play on dials, and you control these little spaceships and try and blow each other up. So in the next decades, computers became more and more powerful, but games were still largely creatively defined by what computers at the time could do. We're looking at a game called Rogue that ran on DOS. And at this time, the story of game development was really the story of people pushing the limits of computers technologically. So by the time the 90s roll around, computers are getting good enough that game designers are pretty much able to make whatever games creatively that they want. And computer games become a $20 billion industry. I recently learned that in the 1990s, Windows 95 was actually the second most installed piece of software, and this game Doom was the most installed piece of software. But there was a new creative block facing game designers in the 90s, which was this problem of retail. So throughout the 80s and the 90s, this is how you bought games, was you would go to the store and they'd be on a shelf in a box. And this gave game retailers an enormous amount of influence over which video games got made and what they looked like. There was only so much space on the shelf, so only the safest blockbuster games got made. And even with the rise of the internet, designers were still scared to sell their games to the public because they didn't want to anger these big box stores. Then a company called Valve comes along and they create this platform called Steam, and they were the first people to really break the barrier and make it mainstream to buy and sell games online, creating a relationship directly between designers and the game-playing public. So as this is happening, there's another amazing development in computer games, which is that the tools of authorship are becoming more democratic. Computers are getting cheaper and more powerful, and you don't need dozens or hundreds of people to make a computer game anymore. You can do it with just 1 or 2 people. So computers get smaller and smaller, the tools of authorship get easier and easier to use, and this leads to an incredible renaissance in video games in the 2000s that we really haven't seen since the days of Space War on the PDP-1. Because overnight it became viable for people to make their own weird art games and sell them right to customers. This is a game made by one guy named Alexander Bruce. This is another game we're looking at. This is probably the most famous independent game. It's called Minecraft. So Minecraft is this beautiful world that you can explore and build things in like Legos. And what's special about it is that it's procedurally generated, which means that the computer designs a completely new world every time you play. It's infinitely large, and you can explore it forever without ever discovering everything inside of it. Minecraft was also made by just one guy. The New Yorker recently profiled this guy that we're looking at now, Kurt J. Mack, who's on a pilgrimage to walk as far as he can in Minecraft. He's been going for 3 years. This is another beautiful game called Fez. Fez is kind of this cubist painting. It's a 3D world, but you can only see it from one kind of two-dimensional angle at a time, so you have to rotate the world like a puzzle so you can explore it. Fez was also made by just 2 people. They worked on it for 5 years, and they sold it directly to customers to enormous critical and commercial success. So because indie games are free from the constraints of publishers and distributors, they can also be really subversive and political. This is a game called Papers, Please that casts you as an immigration officer in a fictional dystopian country. You have to examine people's documents and decide who to let in and who to exclude. But tonight I want to talk about one game in particular. It's this game. I think it's the best video game that's ever been made. You probably have not heard of it. It's called Spelunky. Spelunky is a platformer. You explore these caves and you try to get money and treasure and avoid enemies. And it's inspired by all those old 80s and 90s video games that we saw earlier that were kind of the games of our childhood. But there's a few things that make Spelunky really interesting. The first thing is that every game is procedurally generated, just like Minecraft. It's made out of a common set of building blocks, but it's completely different every time, which means that even if you play for hundreds of hours, as I have, you can never learn the game. You just kind of grow as a person and get a better understanding of the system of the game, which is really interesting. The other thing that makes Spelunky interesting is that it's brutally difficult. It's totally fucking punishing. You start out with almost no resources and only 4 health, and there's no way to save your progress. Every time you die, you go completely back to the beginning with nothing. So very few people have...
Every time you play the game, it's completely randomly generated, so it's a completely new adventure every time you play. This feeling of limitless possibility, that's something that I think games do better than anything else. You know, if they're done right from the very beginning, you have this sense that the game can just go on forever.
It was the game's creator, Derek Yu, talking about it. And what we're looking at now is the way that Derek programmed the game. One of the things that's really interesting is it's not completely random. So he actually created thousands of these chunks, these sort of programmatic pieces that the computer assembles into the grid of the level. And that produces these amazing puzzles and these sort of emergent systems that you can engage with and master as you play a lot. So one of the most interesting things about Spelunky is that there's no story programmed into the game. The only things that happen in the game are a direct result of the decisions you make, the mistakes that you make. But every time you play, you can't help but coming away with this incredible narrative of what happened. The things that you screwed up, the incredible luck and coincidences, and the way that you engage with the system and manipulate it. This has made Spelunky incredibly popular with a new kind of gaming technology, a very new kind of gaming technology, live streaming. So every day, hundreds and hundreds of people play Spelunky live online in front of an audience, and thousands of people tune in to watch and heckle them or cheer them on. It's kind of this 21st century spectator sport. But the thing that really blows my mind about Spelunky is that this game would not have been possible even a few years ago because no one would have published it. It would have never wound up on this shelf. People would have said it's too hard to play, it's too hard to learn, people don't want to challenge themselves this much. In a world where games were still sold in retail, Spelunky would never exist. So I want to leave you with this message, which is that supporting independent games is the same thing as supporting art, and that this stuff is incredibly accessible to you right now, and it's an artistic revolution. It's happening right under your nose. People don't necessarily even know that these games exist. So you can get Spelunky for $15 at spelunkyworld.com, and right now, tonight, you can actually take out your iPhone and delete Candy Crush and install that game that we were just looking at, Threes, which will make you a lot happier as a person. Thank you.